So, YouTube, the platform you are hopefully watching this on, if we have not been taken down by this point. Uh, so, they have banned vaccine misinformation, disinformation, not just on the COVID vaccine, but on all vaccines. And I actually have a little tear sheet for this. I want to pull this up really quickly just so I am reading this correctly. Examples of this content that won't be allowed on YouTube include claims that the flu vaccine causes infertility, or that the MMR shot, which protects against measles, mumps, and rubella, can cause autism. This is according to YouTube's new policy, as well as several prominent anti-vaccine activists like Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Had their channels taken down. Now, this also went into the Russian state-backed broadcaster RT. They had their German language channel taken down as well. That was deleted from YouTube, to which the government of Russia has now reported that they are saying that this is an unprecedented information aggression and they are threatening to block YouTube in their country. So I want to first and foremost say this very quickly before we go any further into this discussion. When in regards to the vaccine, we are 5 everyday people. None of us are doctors. We have been giving our opinions about all of this, but of course, you should reference the CDC, talk to your local doctor. Those are the best ways to get information about the vaccine. With that being said, we are all citizens of the world and we have opinions about this. And so I do believe it is important that we as people who interact with the internet every day should have some kind of, we should be able to talk about how this affects us and how this goes on. So I want to do that now. And everyone, I've been keeping track here, has gone first on one of the subjects that we've talked about either in this episode or the last episode, except for me. So I guess I'll go first this time. So when it comes to this particular subject, I feel very conflicted about this because on one hand, I understand the reasoning behind it. And the reasoning is very strong. And I believe it's valid, which is you want to curb disinformation, misinformation from being out there. And so on a large scale, I understand why YouTube would do this. What I'm afraid of is the murkiness of the language itself. Like, how far can this particularly go when they talk about how they can ban disinformation? The question that I really have is, how do you classify disinformation? Because as we were just having a conversation just a few minutes ago, we were all giving our opinions about how we felt about vaccine mandates. But the question can become, can YouTube now go into this first part of this episode that we just did and say that because we gave opinions that weren't backed up by, certain kinds of research, can my channel now be taken off of YouTube because of opinions that we were having? These are the questions that I have. How far does disinformation go? How far does misinformation go? Currently, it's not being legislated that way, but my question really becomes, where will it eventually end up? And so I'm worried and skeptical, but at the same time, I understand why they are pushing this right now. But with that being said, I want to ask, who do I want to ask next? Earlene, you haven't gone early in a while. I want to ask you next. What is your thoughts on this? Do you believe this was the right move by YouTube for them to be banning COVID or just all vaccine disinformation?
I agree with you, and I feel 2 ways about it. I understand, but where will it stop? Because it's not going to stop. It will trickle into other restrictions to where they're going to end up like other social media sites. Any little thing said, you're banned for how long? It's going to be blocked for how long? It's just really sticky because with any conversation, it's so layered. Any topic is very layered. So where do we stop? Because like you said, we're just talking. We're having a conversation like anyone can have. Will it get pulled because we're having a conversation? How much restriction will we revert back to the way it used to be decades and decades ago? So I think it's really touchy because you're picking one topic, but it will morph into other things people don't want to hear about or talk about, or what else will you restrict? So I think it's really touchy. I understand what the intent may have been, but I really worry about the freedom. As much as I may not like what people have to say, they have the right to say it or speak it. and it's up to me to listen or not listen to it. So when you restrict like that, I just feel it's going to turn into other restrictions, other keywords, other thing that pops up that's going to make it just, be really ugly, really, really ugly. So I do not see this ending well, in my opinion, at all.
All right, and Zach, I want to send it over to you next. What is your thoughts on YouTube just making this move? Go ahead and them banning all disinformation regarding vaccines.
Well, I think Elise touched on a few really good points there. And it's just, yeah, the idea of the free speech on this. I mean, the one thing that has been kind of remarkable, and this is just posing a question, like, why is it that anybody who has had a dissenting opinion of the vaccines, regardless, like any opinion of it, they've instantly been discredited and banned? Like, that alone should be, like that should just be a question mark that we should be able to answer. It's just been sowing more distrust as far as everybody goes. Like, if you're gonna, whenever you silence one side of an argument, it just drives distrust. It's going to sow it through everybody who's watching that. Another thing is, like, this isn't just YouTube, like this is the latest one, but for example, Instagram banned the hashtag natural immunity. So the idea that all of a sudden that isn't even a thing anymore, that we've had for all of human civilization, that's now no longer a discussion point. Anything that hashtag is gone. So that's interesting. It's not just YouTube. Again, it's just, and whenever you start to, like, I know you had a discussion on another episode before regarding regulation of social media,
right?
But the one dark side of that to me is that whenever that happens, you push that one segment into a dark corner of the internet somewhere. You push them into an echo chamber. If you aren't having those open discussions where people can see what's going on, you're kind of keeping tabs on what people are talking about, and you can kind of blow little holes in their discussion points. Like, now you're just pushing them into a corner where there are no dissenting opinions anymore. And that's where things start to get crazy. You saw that escalate on January 6th with QAnon. Like, all of a sudden they were all pushed into these dark corners of the internet and they started to go crazy. And then look what sprung up. Like, you have to have the ability to have this open discussion, again, in the open, where everybody can see it and you can kind of keep tabs on what is going on. Yeah, that's kind of my general view of anytime you silence anything.
Okay. Thank you for that. Fresh Faces, New Ideas, you are next. Do you think this was the right move by YouTube to ban all vaccine disinformation?
Before that, two things. So very quickly, guys, if any of you guys want to further have the mandate discussion or any of this discussion, I'm more than happy to have it with anybody for future reference. This is a discussion I feel very strongly about. It's something I've done a lot of research in. It's a discussion I've had a lot. So I'm very knowledgeable, at least on the talking points, and I think I could help your audience if this is something that they want to. Now, for this mandate, this comes down to two things: whether or not you believe in these corporations' TOS, and whether or not you're a free speech absolutist. I am not a free speech absolutist. I believe there are certain amounts of speech that should not be allowed to be in the public square because they are more detrimental than they are for the ability to just say, oh, I want to have this conversation. I think a lot of the anti-vaccine talk, it makes you sterile, it gives you autism, it makes you magnetic, which is something the French government had to do a study on in order to prove that you do not become magnetic from this vaccine, are more detrimental than it is worth our time to deal with. We have reintroduced smallpox in France, and I believe it is in Minnesota and Utah because of these type of people. Children are dying. Now for this the issue with this vaccine. This is going to hit some people. It's not going to. This is mostly due to how YouTube's algorithm works. I think a way to deal with this would be more open about the way the algorithm works. And then when somebody gets flagged, maybe have an actual person take a look at it to decide whether or not it meets certain criteria. If you are pushing, for example, Gerardo Rivera, when this started, if you hold your breath for 10 seconds, you don't have COVID. That's clearly misinformation. If you're pushing ivermectin as a cure-all based on a thoroughly debunked study, that is a problem. Now, let's be very clear about something with ivermectin. Ivermectin is, in 2015, a Nobel Prize winning drug. However, it is for parasites. The reason people are talking about it as horse paste is because they're buying it from horse feed places. So it comes down to, do you believe that certain types of speech should have the right to exist because everyone should be able to speak what they want? Or do you believe that these types of speech are so detrimental and effective? Now, in YouTube's case, again, I think the issue is going to be, how is their algorithm going to filter this? And what are their checks on their own algorithm? And that's a different topic than do I think some of this stuff needs to be removed? Because I do. I think most of the anti-vax stuff is just garbage that's paid for by lunatics and pushed by lunatics making money. And that's mostly where I feel about it.
Okay. And finally, Rashida, what is your thoughts on this? Did YouTube do the right thing by banning vaccine disinformation?
Well, I mean, it kind of goes into your point of like, what exactly who is supposed to be classifying what disinformation looks like and what that is. And I would be a little more interested in knowing that than I would be in just the headline itself of the ban, because even though I really hate to do this, when we start talking about banning and when we start talking about, well, it's kind of going into what Arlene was mentioning about the haves and the have-nots, which we did get to see a little bit of this summer when we started to go back out, and those of us who went out and started to travel could kind of see that, where there is kind of creating this level of segregation. And I hate that I have to use that term, especially in this context, but it's kind of ringing true. And I would say that, I am not necessarily someone who is against vaccines. I'm not, but I am definitely about making certain that all categories and types of information are available. I do believe that there are some things that are a little more extreme, and I am not saying that we have a free and open, dialogue with those who are really just trying to do whatever they possibly can to dismantle any type or level of I guess status that we have. But I definitely feel that YouTube is a money making business. They are going to do much like Facebook when they banned Captain Orange. They're going to do what they have to do to continue to make money. So if that means that they're going to remove certain information, because again, YouTube and the CDC have had a very long-standing partnership through this pandemic to try to bring information to the public. So of course, naturally, they're going to do what they have to do to maintain that interest, but they're also going to, they have a vested interest in making certain that they maintain their reputation. So I would say, while I'm not surprised by it, that it is just, it does leave open the opportunity to create doubt in what is being hidden from us, doubt in what we are being told and shown.
So before I open up discussion here, I'm just going to go ahead and put a few more of my thoughts on this one. This is something that is just, again, I want to go ahead and just say, just first and foremost, that I understand the reasoning behind it, but this really just comes down to me as being a libertarian versus an authoritarian conversation. Like, should there be certain parts of our society that tell us what is good for us and then just say, accept what we have to say at the end, and we just hope that they have the best of intentions and we just, never know if they don't or not? Or do we allow everyone to kind of just do whatever they want to and then just hope for the best? You kind of hope for something in the middle, or at least if you are me, you kind of hoping for something a little bit in the middle, because I don't like the idea of being fully libertarian or fully authoritarian. But I think in this particular case, I do kind of want to talk about something that Zach alluded to, which is when you silence a certain demographic, they just go somewhere else. You're not really getting rid of the problem that way. And so what we really have in our country and around the world is it feels like a damn near split. Like, it feels like half the people are on board with the vaccine, and then you have half the people who are either questioning it or they're just not on board with it. And so if the goal is to get more people to be pro-vaccine, if that is the goal, I just don't understand how this was the answer. Because I think truthfully, what Twitter was doing last year with Donald Trump, where they were flagging all of his tweets and saying, this is disinformation, this is disinformation, this is disinformation, that felt appropriate. That felt like the right move to do, because it was flagging it for what it was. It was lies. And I think that would have made more sense to me if YouTube would have went into each video and been like, this video contains disinformation, here's links to better information. That feels a little more appropriate to me, because you're addressing the fact there's something wrong with that content, but you're allowing it to exist. But then, I guess the counter argument is that YouTube should feel this moral obligation to being like, no, we're going to be saving lives if we take down this information. And yeah, that feels very noble, but I guess I'm always afraid of, is it really going to stop there? And where do they draw that line, like particularly? Because there's some stuff that's so egregious that you're like, yes, that shouldn't be online. Okay, I understand why that needs to go away. But where do you draw that line? That's truly what I want to know, what I'm more or less afraid of. And I think if that was a little more spelled out, if that was a little more transparent, I'd feel a little more at ease. But right now, there's not really a whole lot of transparency. It's just they're going to get rid of disinformation. But what does that mean? Truthfully, what does that mean?
Can I push back on the authoritarian thing a little bit? Because
Sure.
look, we do need to have we built institutions that we are trusting to tell us what to do in certain situations, whether it's the CDC, whether it's the federal government, whether it's whatever, like we have. So the whole design of them, whether it's the World Health Organization, is for these to be like the sole proprietors of what this information, where the trusted information is supposed to come from. So to say that that is like an overarching way of authoritarianism, I don't really agree with that. Now, look, I think most of our issue is we're not really sure how they're deciding what disinformation is. Like the vaccine stuff, the anti-vax stuff, when we're talking like specific autism, it makes you magnetic, like direct claims, it is very easy to go in and say these claims are false, and then we can remove them. Zach, I know you brought up the QAnon thing. QAnon is very fascinating, but it wasn't just because it came from the dark corners. Part of the reason QAnon exploded was because people were trapped inside and they were able to mainstream that. And then because of the malleability and how weird this thing is, a whole bunch of people fell down the rabbit hole. And that is partly directly due to Facebook and their own algorithm. So that is another issue. As for like silencing these voices, the problem is like where, like, for example, somebody who just recently got removed from Twitter was Alex Bernstein. I believe I'm not saying his name. If you don't know who he is, he was a Fox News contributor, some type of biologist. He's literally the pandemic's wrongest man. Everything he said about the pandemic, whether he went out on Tucker Carlson's his fake populist show where he wears the button down and he pretends to be a regular person, and he was like, yeah, this vaccine has like an 8% proficiency rate. Like this guy was, every time he spoke about the about COVID was wrong, and they had to remove him because everything he said, no matter what type they gave, the way Twitter does, you have 5 bans before they remove you. And then they ultimately removed it. And they're like, oh, they're silencing his free speech. They're silencing his ability to ask questions. He wasn't asking questions. He was directly saying lies purposely over and over again. And I think that the American Frontlines doctors should taste the same thing, because the problem comes down to is there are some sources that are purposely being malicious for money. And again, I can like the American Frontlines, it is mind-boggling these people exist. The people who are pushing ivermectin. At this point, if you're pushing ivermectin, you're doing so willingly for profit. Like you cannot believe that it exists as an effective tool. It has been too thoroughly debunked to believe that talking point. But I think really truly the issue ultimately comes down to what is their definition of misinformation.
Well, and to me, like, again, so touching on those points, I completely agree with you. If it comes down to flat out vaccine lies, like magnetism or turning you into some X-Man, like, of course, yeah, get rid of that.
I want to be an
stuff.
X-Man.
Like,
let's be clear about that.
I would love to be an X-Man too. Honestly.
Who doesn't want to be an X-Man?
Right.
I mean, our system, let's be clear. We become X-Men, it's over. Everything, the society breaks down. We're going to die from climate change. We can't handle that. It just would not happen.
Yeah. So anyway, but yeah, when it comes to those like lies, I agree. Like that should at least be, like Desmond said, flagged, tagged, something, right? Like that stuff's crazy to me. But when it comes to what will be censored, like, yes, this YouTube censorship is now the big headline that we're talking about. But like I had said, like, the hashtag natural immunity is already gone from Instagram. Facebook, after Mark Zuckerberg, I believe it was in front of Senate, had said that he's going to work hand in hand to make sure that none of these lies get out on Facebook. Then there were 2 specific groups that they deleted for people who were suffering vaccine injuries. And again, like that data is hidden too, because nobody expects a vaccine to be 100% safe. I don't think anybody realistically would expect that when it's given to a population the size that it has been. But when you delete a group of 70,000 members and then 120,000 members on Facebook, just 200,000 members gone like that, because they're talking about something that goes against the narrative that's being pushed, that's where things start to get scary. And that's where, like you guys had said, like if you can clearly identify what is going to be blocked, if you mention magnetism with vaccines, you're gone. If you mention autism, you're gone. Okay, let's draw some very harsh lines here, because all of this stuff has been grouped in so far with vaccine misinformation. You know, the fact that there are any vaccine injuries, that can't be talked about at all. That stuff all gets flagged and removed. And that's where it starts to, again, like you guys had talked about, sowing distrust and just not trusting what is going on here. It has to be completely transparent. I mean, the WHO's own Vigi Access, their data collection for this, has over 2.13 million effects or side effects of the vaccines. But that stuff doesn't get talked about. And that's where things start to get hazy. Like, you need open transparency on all of this stuff. I mean, we talked about transparency in government, which is a pipe dream at this point, and same with transparency in this stuff. But that's where you start to get this distrust and this disinformation. And again, like, they have to be very clear with what they're going to be labeling as disinformation here, because so far they don't have a good track record of it. I mean, there were articles coming out earlier that were decrying the use of vitamin D and vitamin C, when we know that those boost your immune system. Like, that'll give you a better fighting chance. There's no negative effects of taking vitamin C or D, unless you're absolutely taking like 10,000 IUs of it a day. But you can take a supplement, and that's not going to do any harm to you. But when those kind of articles are decried as somehow being, you know, fake news, that's where people start to distrust this stuff.
And that's my issue. That's my issue with it. Like, where's the line? Now, if, like what Desmond said, if you're going to require a fact check sheet, some tag saying where is your information coming from, and until you put that, it will be, you know, in your drafts until you put, you know, have the facts behind what you're saying, because if you don't have that, then it's not going to stay up. But my issue, like everyone has already said, where do we stop with this? And when you take something away, you raise suspicion, you raise the anxiety, you raise what's going on. And it's a real thin line, thin ice when you start doing this, because it has not been done well before. It was not done well before. How can you guarantee it's gonna be done well now? And you can't. And to me, it's like, if you just require a fact check or some type of link saying, okay, you're saying this, where's your information coming from? Then that kind of makes it more solid. Okay, so they didn't have their fact checks. They didn't say where they're referencing it. So I'm sorry. So who can debate that? Who's going to debate you saying, I just want you to put the facts up, put the fact check, you know, MLA format. What are we going to use? Put your information in here. If they're not doing that, then that to me makes more sense, where I can see myself agreeing with it. But it has not been done well before. And I really feel it's going to be, like Zach said, you're going to just take down a whole group of people, a whole group of things, to where it's like, now you're making people more suspicious. Anxiety is risen, and they're going to go the deepest, darkest depths of the internet, and it's going to be straight melee.
Wait, but there's some things on this vaccine. So I don't know about these two groups now that you mentioned. It depends on what they're saying for the side effects. Now, let's be clear about this, because the side effects are there. I literally just Googled it, CDC side effects. It was the first link. The information is there. You're not allowed to talk about the side effects. It's how you refer to the side effects, or if you're overblowing them. That, for example, people refer to VAERS, and it has the last time I checked, it had something like 12,000 deaths on VAERS. VAERS is not a reputable source. However, it is part of the CDC. What VAERS says is basically any type of person who gets the vaccine and then dies from it, it is put into the system and then is later fact checked to decide whether it's not. But VAERS is open source, so anyone can do it. There's people saying the vaccine turned me into the Hulk. There's people saying all types of nonsense into it. So it's part of the problem with, I'm going to attach all this information to it, is the people reading it. This comes down to what we were talking about when research earlier is, people don't understand what they're looking at. That's how you end up with people who say, ivermectin clearly works, even though there was like 80 studies and they were all garbage. Like, literally, they would make up information in these studies that people are still using to push ivermectin. The problem has to be, you have to trust that some of these institutions are out there looking out for your best interest and say, hey, when they flag something or they tell you something is wrong, and these people keep spreading it, it's up to these private companies to help stamp that down for the betterment of people. I hear this all the time about, you can't talk about the side effects. You can absolutely talk about the side effects. That's part of why when you get the vaccine, they talk about some of the potential side effects for you. You can talk to your doctors about it. This information is out there. You can't just Google, if you Google vaccine side effects, they're not going to kick down your door and put a hood on your head.
I would urge you to look into these two groups, because these were vaccine injury survivors, and they are
send
gone.
me
I would love to, if you send me this information, I would love to come on and talk to you directly about this. This is something I would look into. But I've generally, when I'm referring to this, is like an overall conversation about the way this is used. The people who are pushing this like vaccine and misinformation, like the big names that are doing it are doing it for profit. Like Fox News pushing any of this anti-vax mandates. Fox News is required to do it. 90% of their people are vaccinated. I am relatively certain Tucker Carlson is. Most of the people in Congress are vaccinated. Of the people in Congress who I don't believe are vaccinated, I think it's just Rand Paul, because he's a lunatic. Now, if we want to talk about natural immunity, we can absolutely talk about natural immunity. Now, there's conflicting data on this. My understanding about a week ago was it is just better than taking the original the shot itself. But there was data that said we don't know whether it lasts 3 months or 63 months, which is a pretty big time difference. So there needs to be more. And again, the issue with natural immunity comes down to you have to get exposed to it first. So it is already safer for you to be vaccinated than for you not to be vaccinated if you're going to get the natural immunity. And the combination of the two is the best. Now, for the hashtag thing, this is actually something that's also happened with Twitter, where there was the QAnon people, they yoinked a hashtag Save the Children. And they basically made it this like super toxic thing that was drowning out the actual use of it. So it is possible that Instagram was dealing with people who are misusing this current tag in order to drown out something that was actually being referred to. That would require some actual looking into, because this is a thing that happens where people with dishonest interest take something that can be seen good and they piggyback on it and they turn it toxic.
If this was anomalous, I would tend to agree with that. But the fact that there's a pretty, you can see the direction that this has been going. Like, it's not like this is just an anomaly all of a sudden. Oh, well, we can't have natural immunity talked about. Like, I would agree if this was an anomalous event, but when you see pretty steady censorship going, I don't think so.
So I don't use Instagram. So
Moderator jumping in here. We are actually going to probably wrap this up a little bit. We are kind of getting towards the end of our hour here. But before I do that, Rashida, you haven't spoken in a little bit. Did you want to throw in some last words?
I haven't. No, I think this is just a very interesting conversation, especially the direction that we were heading into about the natural immunity discussion, and also the loss of the hashtag in circulation on the interwebs, as it were. But I really think that, I would just encourage people to the best of their ability to do a couple things, because these are things that I can tell you for a fact that work. If you are having difficulties getting access to the information that you need, or you found an article and it's written by a bunch of doctors and it doesn't make any sense, they have email addresses on these articles. They are peer reviewed, and you can email them and someone will answer you. There is a nerd right now who can't wait for the average person to reach out to them with a question. Believe me, I am that nerd, and that I am that person that does this, and people are very excited to answer my questions. So if it doesn't even matter if it isn't a peer reviewed article, it could just be, it could be perhaps someone that works in your local CDC office or your local Health and Human Services office. There are people who will provide you answers to your questions. So if anyone listening to this is thinking like, good Lord, all of you all and your opinions, that's fine. But also, you should feel empowered to seek the information for yourself. I think that's the biggest takeaway from this conversation, where we're talking about changing the age of voting. We're talking about or our stance on sex work. And I think the best thing for everyone to do is just to get as informed as you possibly can, which always means reaching out and asking for help from those who have the expertise that you may not.
I love that closing. All right. So I want to just wrap up this conversation additionally by saying that, your local physicians that you see, like at local clinics, local hospitals, family care providers, they are consistently being required to do continuing education on COVID-19, on the vaccines. So if you trust your doctor, which I assume most people do, please just go out and ask them questions directly. If you haven't already, you can also check out with the CDC. But I also advocate that people just talk with your normal practitioners about this, because they are required to be consistently up to date on this information, and they will be able to give you the best information possible, again, outside of the CDC, on the information of the vaccine, COVID-19, any questions you may have. With that being said, we are going to wrap up this conversation. I've kept my panelists here longer than I told them that I would. So we are going to wrap up as the sun is now going down. So I would like to give everyone a chance to give some closing statements and to say where they can find you at online. I'm going to start with Fresh Faces New Ideas. Where can everyone find you at outside of independent thought debate panels?
Okay, first, I really enjoyed this panel. This was probably the most contentious one I've been on. I would love to have, especially these last two conversations, on more in depth, because there's a lot more we can go into with any of your panels. I have all your Instagram stuff. I will give you my information. I will, especially Zach, when we were talking about those specific Facebook pages, I would love to actually look into that, to cover that on my show. So speaking of which, I am Fresh Faces New Ideas. I am mostly on Twitch. You can find me on twitch.tv/Fresh Faces New Ideas. You can find me on Twitter at Faces Ideas. You can find me on Instagram, I believe, at Fresh Faces New Ideas, but I don't generally use it. So if you message me, there's a good chance I'll ignore it by accident. But if you follow me in those two places, that is generally where I do it. I stream during the week at 1 p.m. EST, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Friday. Thursdays usually is 5 p.m. EST. If you go to my Twitter at Faces Ideas, it has a link to my everything. My Twitter, my YouTube, my Twitch, my Discord, which I love to talk to people. So if you want to come on and chat with me there, come find me. I enjoy this conversation. I'm willing to talk to anyone basically about any conversation. And thank you for having me.
All right, thank you. And next, Rashida, thank you for coming on to the panel today. Where can everyone find you and your podcast?
Everyone can find me and my podcast at allroadscross.com, or by following me at Crossroads Podcast on Instagram, or Crossroads Pod C1 on Facebook and Twitter. I am also on TikTok at Crossroads Podcast or Crossroads Pod C1. Please feel free to follow me there on the TikTok for all of your listening and viewing pleasures. It has been a privilege to be here. Thank you very much for having me, Desmond.
Thank you. And Erlene, thank you so much for coming on to the panel today. Where can everyone find the 47 podcast that you are now the curator of?
Thank you so much for having me. I love being on the other side of things, and it was amazing meeting some of these new faces. I've known Rashida for quite some time. You can find Shall You Proceed and I Made This Bed podcast on all streaming platforms. I'm on Facebook at Shall You Proceed Podcast. I am on Instagram, Shall You Proceed Podcast. You can find me all my podcasts and other things that I do on emangoinclusivemedia.org. And everyone is welcome to be on my show. I usually drop every Tuesday and Friday, depending on what show it is. So this has been amazing. Thank you for doing this.
Thank you. And finally, last but not least, Zach, thank you for coming on to the podcast today. Well, I guess onto the panel. I keep saying podcast. Thank you. Where can everyone find you and your podcast?
Well, thanks for having me, and thanks for having a Canadian on to speak American politics. I learned more in these than I think than anybody realizes. But so thank you for having me on. It was nice meeting everybody here. And yeah, you can find me any podcasting platform. It's Plaid Jacket Philosopher. Once weekly, I upload an episode, and then again, Instagram is Plaid Jacket Philosopher. Facebook is Plaid Jacket Philosopher. And Twitter is @Jacket Plaid. So anyway, yeah, again, thanks for having me on.
All right. I want to say thank you to all my panels for coming on today. If you if you liked this panel, please let me know. Drop a comment down below. Let us know how you thought of the discussion, what you thought of me, of the panelists. Let us know about what you thought about our takes. If you are interested in seeing more of these go on, please subscribe to the channel. Also, there'll be links to all of the panelists' podcasts and Twitch platforms down in the episode description. So go down there and subscribe to their podcasts and their channels. Podcasting is a tireless job. Please help out these poor podcasters. Give them a subscription on Apple Podcasts and our lone Twitch streamer on Twitch. So thank you again for everyone for coming here today. We will have some more of these in the future. So make sure you stay tuned by being subscribed. We will see everyone in the next episode. Take care.